Trump sued the IRS for $10 billion, saying that his tax returns were improperly leaked. This suit raised questions from the beginning, because this was Trump basically suing himself as both sides of the federal government. He's a party to both sides. Trump then moved to voluntarily dismiss this suit in May, saying that, not even actually revealing initially that he had reached a settlement, but moved to dismiss it. The judge granted his voluntary dismissal. That's this judge here, Judge Kathleen Williams. Shortly after that dismissal, we learned that there was a settlement agreement. That settlement agreement, of course, gave Trump, his family, immunity from any ongoing IRS inquiries, and it also created the anti-weaponization fund, that $1.776 billion so-called slush fund. After that happened, a group of 35 former federal judges filed a motion with this court, with Judge Kathleen Williams, asking her to revisit it, saying that there seems to have been a sham here. There might have been some collusion, wanting to...
What was the sham?
It's exactly that Trump basically sued himself. So he is both parties of this. And in this ruling today, she's saying that there was never any adverseness here. There was no real lawsuit here. And basically what Judge Williams is saying here today is that this was a complete sham so that Trump could get this outcome with some sort of judicial legitimacy. And I want to read briefly from this, because this line just really captures the whole thing. It says, "This action was never about a party seeking judicial resolution of a legal issue or a factual dispute. The nature of the suit itself and the conduct of the parties and counsel from its filing make plain that this was an attempt to use the court to provide some legitimacy to an agreement to confer immunity to people and entities affiliated with the president, and to earmark billions of dollars from American taxpayers to redress grievances not defined in the law." So really what she's saying, she is ripping them apart, saying that there was never any legitimacy. You conned the court, basically using the court as a vehicle for legitimacy here to reach these ends, and that this...
So now we have to ask the real question. What do those 56 pages actually mean? Because pay close attention to what Judge Williams did not rule. She did not rule that the fund was illegal. She did not rule that the immunity was illegal either. Instead, she made what may be an even more significant ruling. She said that there was never a legitimate lawsuit in the first place. No adverse parties, no genuine legal controversy, and no jurisdiction. And this is where, in my view, the ruling becomes truly interesting. Because this is not just some technical legal decision. If the court is saying that the case legally never existed from the beginning, then a much bigger question immediately arises. How was this case allowed to become part of the legal process for so long in the first place? And if the case never legally existed, then what exactly was the legal foundation for the settlement, the decisions, and all the actions that followed? You cannot settle a case that never existed. And you cannot appeal a ruling involving a case that, according to the court, was never legally there to begin with. That is why, in my opinion, this 56-page ruling could be so important. Because this may not simply be a question of whether Trump won or lost a legal battle. It could raise questions about the very foundation of the entire case. CNN's Casey Hunt put that exact question to senior justice correspondent Evan Perez. So now the real question is this. What does this 56-page ruling actually mean for Donald Trump? And if Judge Williams' reasoning is followed, what could it mean for everything that happened before it?
This was a 56-page ruling. Walk us through it. What stands out? Why is it so important?
Yeah, Casey, you don't normally see judges issue 56 pages of just scathing. She was truly mad at the Justice Department and at Todd Blanche, the Attorney General in particular, in part because what she was calling out was a fraud on the court. This was an attempt, she says, by the Justice Department, by the Trump administration, to essentially have a blessing of the courts on a deal that wasn't really an adverse proceeding, which is what would make a lawsuit. And so she calls it all out. I'll read you just a part of what she writes. She says, "This lawsuit was not brought to vindicate rights. It was brought to manipulate the judicial process to pursue benefits unavailable in litigation because the parties were not adverse." And then she goes on later on to say that the nature of the suit itself and the conduct of the parties and counsel from its filing make plain that this was an attempt to use the court to provide some legitimacy to an agreement to confer immunity to people and entities affiliated with the president and to earmark billions of dollars from American taxpayers to redress grievances not defined in the law. Again, those are very, very strong words from a judge. As you pointed out, she is sanctioning the lawyers involved, which could be an issue. Of course, we know Todd Blanche is due for a Senate proceeding, a Senate hearing for his nomination to be the Attorney General permanently. That is coming up on Wednesday. But longer term, Casey, what this means is probably more meaningful for the president and his companies, his sons, because if there's any investigation that comes up, let's say after Donald Trump leaves office, and they try to use this so-called agreement, this settlement, to say, no, you can't look at us. What this judge is saying is that you can't even refer to that. Now, I'm not sure whether she has the power to do this, but she's basically saying that since this lawsuit was a farce from the beginning, you can't now call this a settlement in a good faith.
Law enforcement analyst, the former deputy director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe. Andy McCabe, what do you see in what the judge has done here, and what would you underscore as this potentially goes forward? Because, as Evan said, it's not clear exactly what power the judge has here, how this materially affects things, but certainly it is, at the very least, a symbolic blow to a president who cares quite a bit about symbolism.
Oh, it's a strong symbolic blow. It's also potentially a much more than that, depending on where these referrals about the attorneys involved, where that stuff goes. But Casey, the thing that jumps out to me here is many people were surprised by the creation of this fund to compensate the president's supporters. Many people were shocked by the conveyance of immunity, despite the current acting attorney general's rejection of that term, immunity for tax problems. But the judge here went far beyond that. She looked at the actual factual circumstances in the way that this sort of fake lawsuit has made its way through the process and really relied on those for her conclusion. So in other words, the Department of Justice never actually answered the complaint in this matter, which enabled this thing to just kind of hover, assigned to a judge, but it never actually took on the form of a lawsuit in which a matter is of controversy and two sides are fighting over it. They never filed a complaint. The plaintiff allowed them to get away with that, and that gave the plaintiff the ability to basically dismiss the lawsuit without getting the judge's approval, which is exactly what happened here in return for these very suspicious agreements. Another great point is that there were many other victims of this IRS problem. So the person who inappropriately shared the tax information of citizens did it not just for Donald Trump and his family, but for many other people as well. Some of those folks filed lawsuits, and the Department of Justice jumped in and defended the IRS in every one of those suits. They could have done the exact same thing here, as the president was a very similar plaintiff, but of course they objected. They decided not to. So there are all kinds of facts in the background here that really made this entire thing look like exactly what it was.
Now, let's take a step back and look at the strangest part of this entire case. Trump was facing a legal battle where the opposing side was, in reality, also connected to Trump. Trump's own lawyer was taking a position against Trump. Then that same lawyer reached a settlement with Trump. And later, he personally canceled a major part of that agreement. Why? Because there was no genuine opposing party standing in court to challenge that decision. And that may be the most bizarre part of this entire situation. If, within the same legal structure, one side files the case, handles its own defense, reaches a settlement, and then later modifies that settlement itself, then we have to ask, was this ever a real lawsuit in the first place? The fund became the issue that captured everyone's attention. But the real battle was never about the fund. The real issue was immunity. And that's where Judge Williams drew a clear line. Her message was simple. Not in my courtroom. And in my opinion, that may be the most important takeaway from this entire case. Because once a court reaches the conclusion that there was never a genuine legal conflict between the parties, a basic question immediately arises. On what legal basis was this case ever allowed to enter the court in the first place? And if that legal foundation never truly existed, then how should we view everything that happened afterward? That's why this story is no longer just about Trump and the fund. It's about the process that allowed this case to go as far as it did. So now I want to hear from you. Is this ruling simply a technical legal decision, or did Judge Williams just raise serious questions about the foundation of the entire legal process? Share your opinion in the comments. And if you believe this angle of the story deserves more attention, make sure to like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. I'll keep you updated on every major development in this case.